Welcome back to the deep dive. Our mission here, as always, is to take the sources you send us, cut through the noise, and really get to the heart of the story.
And today, the story is, well, monumental. We're doing a deep dive into the origin, the struggle, and the eventual magnificence of Tenochtitlan.
It's a story about building one of history's most organized cities against, and this is not an exaggeration, truly impossible odds.
We're not just looking at a timeline. We're looking at the sources that reveal the political philosophy, the mythic destiny, and just the sheer audacity it took.
The goal here is to trace how a small, desperate group of fugitives, basically hunted and starving, managed to transform a barren salt lake into the heart of a vast empire.
And all in the span of just 200 years. It's an incredible story.
Okay, so to really unpack this, our sources give us a fantastic narrative anchor. We're going to ground our whole discussion in a single year, 1502, a moment of huge imperial transition.
It's the perfect anchor. The Mexico world is in mourning. Their great military Tlatoani, their leader, has just died.
The city is in a state of flux.
Exactly. In their calendar, it's the year 10 rabbit, and the entire city-state, the Altepetl, is in this state of, deep ceremonial grief.
And the leader who died was a Huitzotl.
Yes, a Huitzotl. He was the greatest military expansionist they had ever known. I mean, he expanded the señorío, their dominion, to its absolute largest historical extent. He was a conqueror.
And our sources paint this huge inflection point through the eyes of one man, the man who's about to step into those shoes.
Moctezuma II.
Moctezuma.
Exactly. Moctezuma II, which means the severe man. And he's there, reflecting on the legacy he's about to inherit. You can feel the weight of it.
And while he's reflecting, the city itself is putting on a display, right? Even in mourning, it's showing off its power.
Oh, absolutely. The imperial splendor is on full display.
So what does that city look like? To him, to its people, to outsiders seeing it for the first time?
The descriptions are just stunning. It's repeatedly called a jewel, polished and set right in the middle of Lake Texcoco.
A jewel on the water.
Yes, and it had these poetic names, like Tenochtitlan,
which means
where the eagle lives among the clouds. That wasn't just, a pretty name. It was a statement of destiny. The idea was that the clouds settled on the lake, so it was like this city of the sun was built right on top of them.
I love that. A city of water and stone, literally reflecting the heavens.
And if you were looking at it from a high point, say the Cerro de Iztapalapa, it didn't even look like one lake. All the engineering projects, the causeways and dikes, made it look like this valley of intersecting, organized slabs of water.
A lacustre metropolis.
That's the perfect term. And the sources from that time, even from its enemies, confirm it was already seen as one of the largest, cleanest, and most organized cities in the world. It was immense, splendid, fearsome, and radiant. It commanded respect.
Okay, let's dive into that moment of reflection for Moctezuma in 1502. This isn't just about politics for him, it's deeply spiritual.
Oh, it's a full-on cosmic encounter. He's wrestling with mortality, with destiny, and the sources place him in front of a very specific, very powerful artifact.
Which is what?
The monolithic sculpture of Tenochtitlan.
The Lady of the Earth.
Yes, and she's terrifying. She is the devourer of men, the chthonic deity who consumes the dead. And Moctezuma is there, reflecting on how Tenochtitlan has just devoured a Huitzotl, eaten his physical form.
But in the Mexico worldview, that's not the end, is it? It's a transition.
It's not the end at all. It's actually the first step. Death for them is this violent but regenerative process.
So being devoured is actually a kind of rebirth.
Precisely. The consumption by Tenochtitlan is what allows for rebirth in Tlaltepec, the region of the earth. From there, a Huitzol begins his long, hard journey to Mictlan, the underworld.
And he's headed to a specific region there.
Yes, to Apanoia, which translates quite literally to the passage of water.
The passage of water. And this is where that sense of cosmic irony, that paradox, really hits Moctezuma.
It hits him hard. He sees that watery destination as just so appropriate for a Huitzotl. There's a powerful connection.
Yeah, what's the connection?
It's his name. Huitzol's entire identity is soaked in water symbolism, and specifically dark water symbolism.
His name means?
A Huitzotl translates to something like watery, spiny, poisonous water creature. It's the name of a mythical beast.
What kind of beast?
It's often shown as a sort of otter-like creature, maybe a small spiny mammal with a hand at the end of its tail. It lives deep in the lake, and its whole purpose is to grab people and drown them.
So he's named after a water demon, essentially.
Mythically, yes. He was a man of water. He lived by the water. His empire was built from a water city. And the paradox is how he actually died.
Which wasn't in battle.
No. The irony was stark, unforgettable. Huitzotl died from injuries he got during a recent huge flood in Tenochtitlan, a major unexpected inundation that just swamped parts of the city.
And the flood was linked to his own projects, wasn't it?
Directly. The historical accounts tell us the flood was the result of a big waterworks project that Huitzotl himself had started to bring in new water sources. Some sources even say he hit his head on a low-door lintel trying to escape the rising water in his own palace.
So he lived by harnessing the water, and in the end, the water he tried to harness is what killed him.
Exactly. And you could just imagine Moctezuma, who was known for being this deep, fatalistic thinker, contemplating that link, wondering if their names were actually destinies, or maybe even warnings.
Let's pivot from that personal, tragic end to the public display. The funeral rites must have been an incredible demonstration of the empire's power.
Oh, they were beyond magnificent.
Yeah.
It was an absolute show of force. The funeral pyre itself, the fire that renews everything, is described as just colossal.
And Huitzotl himself.
He was prepared for his journey to Mictlan with incredible care. He was dressed in layers and layers of the finest embroidered cotton mantles. I mean, the textile work alone was a demonstration of their sophistication.
And cotton was a tribute item, right? So this is showing off their reach.
Showing off the entire network. And then came the offerings from every corner of the Semanawak, the world.
What kind of things?
Staggering amounts of tribute. Exquisite textiles, precious jewels like jade, and just enormous quantities of vibrant feathers, especially Quetzal feathers.
Which would have come from very far away.
Hundreds of miles. From the tropical lowlands that Huitzotl's own armies had only recently conquered. All that wealth, all the food of his conquests, was piled onto the pyre.
So the funeral wasn't just grief, it was a political statement.
It was a clear assertion of dominance, a message to everyone watching. This is the power you're dealing with. It solidified for Moctezuma that he wasn't just inheriting a city, he was inheriting a war machine.
And at this moment, as he's watching all this, he's already been chosen. What's his actual status?
He's perfectly positioned. He holds the highest authority in both religion and the military, which is essential for a Tlatoani.
So in the religious sphere.
He is the Huitzilopochtli, the high priest of their patron god, Huitzilopochtli, the god of the sun and war, the ultimate spiritual office.
And militarily.
He holds the two highest posts. He's the Tlachtocatl, the general of the House of Darts, and also the Lake Texcoco, the great general, the Lord of Men. Together, those two roles control the entire imperial army.
So the council's choice was a foregone conclusion.
Absolutely. His military record was proven. He understood the rituals inside and out. He was ready to command the empire that Huitzotl had just finished building.
And this moment of transition, it forces Moctezuma to think not just about the recent triumphs, but about the whole painful arc of their history.
Yes, and our sources draw this really clear line between the glorious official history, the one that the great political architect Tenochtitlan had basically written,
Right.
and the brutal true history of their survival.
And the defining fact of that true history is what?
It's simple, and it's everything. They were the last major group to arrive in the basin in Mexico. They showed up centuries too late to a party that was already over. The land was claimed, the power was consolidated, they were outsiders.
To really get a sense of their struggle, we need to paint a picture of the political landscape they walked into. This is post-Teotihuacan. The valley is not empty.
Not even close. It's a political pressure cooker. The sources are clear that the basin was dominated by several major powers already.
Like who?
First, you have the Colhuas. They founded Culhuacan way back in the 6th century, so they had the prestige of ancient lineage. They were the old blood.
The aristocrats of the valley.
You could say that. Then, after the big collapse of the Toltec capital, Tula, you get another wave of migrants. The most important of these were the Tepenecas.
Their name means the people who make stone houses, right?
Yes, which tells you they were builders, they were organized. They started arriving in the 11th century and founded these major strongholds like Tenayuca and, most importantly, Azcapotzalco.
And Azcapotzalco becomes the big regional power, the hegemon that Mexico will have to serve for decades.
Precisely. Azcapotzalco held the military key to the whole basin. Everyone paid them tribute. And then finally, you have the Acolhuas, who arrived late in the 11th century and founded Texcoco.
So by the time the Mexico wander in around 1250,
The land is completely taken, and they're seen as, well, as crude, disruptive outsiders, little more than squatters.
let's talk about that initial struggle. Where did they even try to settle?
They just wandered. They tried settling in a few places, always without permission, always on marginal land. Then, around 1280, they make a more serious attempt at Chapultepec. the Hill of the Grasshopper.
And that place had a symbolic pull for them, didn't it?
It did. The practical conditions were awful, but the location itself resonated with their founding myths. It was near an island that seemed uninhabitable, but the sources say it reminded them of Coatepec Hill.
The mythical birthplace of their god, Huitzilopochtli.
The very same. They were looking for a place their god had ordained for them, even if it made no practical sense.
And their first temple there was humble.
Humble is an understatement. It was desperate. A tiny, small temple built on that islet with, the sources emphasize, very poor materials. It just screamed insecurity and lack of resources.
But even that was too much for the established powers, which leads to this critical moment in their history, the near-extinction event.
This is the trauma that defines them. Around 1299, the big coalition, led by Culhuacan, decides they've had enough of these aggressive newcomers. They launch a full-scale war of extermination at Chapultepec.
A massacre.
An attempted genocide. It was meant to wipe them off the map for good.
And the survivors fled.
They were hunted ruthlessly. The sources describe panicked refugees fleeing for their lives, having to swim halfway across the lake, this terrifying, desperate crossing to get to the most remote, miserable little islets they could find. They were cornered, and they genuinely feared total annihilation.
But the colonists didn't finish the job. Why not? Why let them settle on those distant saline islets?
It was pure arrogance, a profound underestimation of who they were dealing with.
They thought the environment itself would kill them off.
Exactly. They gave the Mexica permission to settle on the salt marsh, totally confident that the conditions, no fresh water, no farmable land, just muck and insects and disease, would finish the job for them. They gave them the worst real estate in the valley and expected nature to be the executioner.
It's just astonishing how wrong they were.
And that underestimation is the key to the Mexica story. Moctezuma reflects on this. The expectation was death by starvation. But what happened was the exact opposite. They had this almost feral will to survive.
They didn't die.
They didn't die. They organized, they adapted, and they ended up, in Moctezuma's brutal words, devouring every being that walked. Adversity wasn't their poison. It was the crucible that forged their empire.
And this is where the sources get so fascinating. How did they actually do it? How did they survive? They're on a salt marsh, surrounded by undrinkable water.
But the basin of Mexico had this incredible biodiversity, even in the saline zones. And that became their unexpected salvation.
So their first move was to change their identity.
Immediately. They started calling themselves Adlacachichimicas,
Which means fishermen.
fishermen and hunters of the water. They just leaned right into their new environment and became absolute experts at leveraging it.
So what were the obvious things they could eat? The staples.
They started with things you might expect. Aquatic birds, like the Mexican duck and water hens. They could catch endemic fish, like charals, these small, oily fish, and gather huge amounts of axolotls, which are a kind of freshwater shrimp.
Good sources of protein, easy to get.
Exactly. That's what met their basic daily caloric needs and stopped them from starving in the first few weeks and months.
But the real survival story is in the mud. The saline mud near their settlement held the truly unique and frankly surprising sources of protein.
We have to talk about the most famous resident of that mud, the axolotl, Ambystoma mexicana.
The axolotl.
The axolotl. Its Nahuatl name is Olotl, which means water monster, and that's what it was to them.
The famous salamander that never grows up. A water monster that became a daily meal.
A foundational staple. It's a dark, brownish amphibian, and it was incredibly abundant in the muddy parts of the lake. The thing is, the axolotl is entirely carnivorous. It eats worms, fish, larvae. It was basically a free-range protein factory just waiting for them in the mud.
And the sources say that the desperate conditions of the early settlement were mirrored in the behavior of the axolotls themselves.
It's a fascinating parallel. Because the habitat was so dense and the competition for resources so fierce, cannibalism among the axolotls was common. They'd often find them with legs or gills bitten off by their own kind.
A tough, high-protein food source for a tough, high-protein people.
Exactly. And this wasn't some rare delicacy. It was a daily food, eaten in stews and broths, roasted, baked in corn husks as tlapic, or in tamales.
And there's an amazing anecdote in the sources about how they actually harvested them, which just speaks volumes.
The harvest itself was dangerous work. You had to dive down and dig around in that thick, deep mud. And we have this account from a descendant describing how children were used for this.
How?
The father would tie the child with a strong rope made of tule reeds to the trunk of an ahuehuete tree on the shore. Then he'd throw the kid into the water.
To stop them from drowning.
Yes, it was a safety line. It stopped them from getting lost or drowning while they were underwater, feeling through the mud, grabbing axolotls and other things. Then they'd come up, skim them, and cook them right in the ashes.
Tying your child to a tree so they can harvest mud monsters for dinner, that tells you everything you need to know about their will to survive.
It became the central virtue of their culture. But it wasn't just amphibians. They took insect gastronomy to an incredible level.
Which was absolutely vital for protein.
Dense, readily available protein, fats, nutrients. They developed an entire cuisine around insects, turning something other cultures might see as, disgusting, into a sustainable economic resource.
So what was on the menu? Let's start with the Mexica caviar.
Okay, that title belongs to the eggs. You have excoatli, which were fly eggs, and Eskimos' ant eggs. But the true lake caviar was axolotl.
What's that?
The eggs of a specific species of aquatic water bug. They would collect these eggs in massive quantities and prepare them into a dish called awals. It was a highly sought-after food.
So these weren't just emergency rations. They became luxury items.
They absolutely were. Being able to collect, store, and trade these dense protein sources gave them a real economic edge. And think about all the other insects. Grasshoppers, chapulins, which are still a delicacy today, or the worms they ate.
So many worms.
Neocheles, the white ones, teocheoles, the red ones, chulemoles, earthworms, even mountain bugs, jumeos. This diet fueled them. It built the physical strength they needed for what came next.
And they supplemented this with plants and fungi from the edges of the lake.
They had to. They'd swim or canoe to the shores to gather greens like quillites and verdolagas. They had green tomatoes, wild beans, and of course, the prickly pear cactus, eating both the fruit, the tunas, and the pads, the nopali.
And our sources highlight two specific plants that are basically superfoods, showing how advanced their nutritional understanding was.
Yes, the first is amaranth, which they called quintiles. This was a main food for all the cultures in that region, valued for its incredible protein density.
And there's a modern connection here that's just amazing.
It's a great point for you, the listener. NASA is currently studying amaranth for astronauts to grow and eat on the International Space Station. Because its nutritional profile is just that good, a pre-Columbian superfood is still on the cutting edge of science.
That really puts their resourcefulness in perspective. And the second superfood came directly from Lake Texcoco itself.
That was a blue-green algae they called diquititl, food of the gods.
Today, we know it as spirulina.
The very same. They just skim it off the surface of a lake and prepare it as a sort of foam or cream. Immensely high in protein and vitamins. You combine that with the insects, the axolotls, the shore vegetables, you have a sustainable, intensely high protein diet.
And the result of all this is that they didn't just survive on the salt marsh, they got strong.
They developed the psychological and physical fortitude to become the ultimate predators in the basin. Their survival, their willingness to devour every being that walked, was channeled directly into their imperial mission. They were forged in the mud, and they emerged hungry for more than just food.
Okay, so Moctezuma's reflection shifts. He goes from that brutal physical survival to the ideological justification for their dominance. This is where the official history comes in.
This is the narrative crafted by the great Nezahualcoyotl, Tlaquielo. It's the story they told themselves and the story they told everyone they conquered.
The story of the eagle on the cactus.
The foundational myth that their patron god, Huitzilopochtli, ordered them not to settle until they saw a specific sign, an eagle on a nopal cactus devouring something. This is the potent image they supposedly found on that miserable islet, and is what we now see as the national symbol of Mexico.
It completely reframes their story. They're not desperate fugitives anymore.
No, they are the chosen people. The shame is replaced with the glory of a divine mandate.
But our sources suggest it's more complicated than that. They weren't just a wandering tribe who got lucky. They were politically organized from the start.
That's a key scholarly argument. The idea that they just evolved from a simple tribe into a complex state is too simplistic. The sources suggest they had a highly structured political capacity from the moment they left their mythical homeland, Aztlan. They were ready for statehood.
And we can see this in their own records.
Yes. If you look at the Tira de la Peregrinación, the Buturini Codex, which is basically their migration map, you see something interesting. The Mexicas aren't shown as just a big crowd. They're shown as four distinct, organized figures.
Representing what?
The scholar Eduardo Corona argued that this represents their four councils: the military, the religious, the judicial, and the commoners. It suggests they already had a sophisticated political structure in place. They were a Huitzilopochtli, a state, just waiting for a place to put down roots.
And that structure, combined with Huitzilopochtli's defined message, gave them this incredible sense of mission.
An unwavering conviction. The message was clear. They were destined to be the dominant people of the four corners of the Simanawak, their word for the known world. They saw themselves as the elected people.
Not innovators, but inheritors.
Exactly. The chosen, inevitable inheritors and continuators of the great civilizations that came before them.
Which brings us to the ultimate physical declaration of this belief. The Aztec calendar stone, or more accurately, the sunstone. It's so much more than a calendar.
Oh, it's a piece of political propaganda carved in stone. It's their historical and mythic declaration of their central place in the cosmos.
So at the very center, you have the face of the sun god, Tonatiuh, representing their era, the fifth sun.
And that face is surrounded by four quadrants that form the symbol Olin, which means movement. So their era is Nawi Olin, for movement.
But the genius of the stone is how it co-opts the history of the empires that came before them. How does it link the Mexica to Teotihuacan and Tula?
It does it visually and mythically. Those four quadrants surrounding the center. They represent the four suns, the four previous eras of the world, all of which ended in catastrophe.
Yeah.
And Mexica very cleverly put the patron gods of those previous empires into those quadrants.
So for Teotihuacan,
In the lower quadrants, you find Tlaloc and Chalakyu. These were the defining deities, the numenes of the great Teotihuacano Empire. By putting them on their stone, Mexico are saying their history, their legacy, it belongs to us now. We are the inheritors. And they do the same thing for the Toltecs, who were the great military power after Teotihuacan. Absolutely. In the upper quadrants, you have Quetzalcoatl and Tezcatlipoca, the deities most associated with the Toltec state of Tula. So the two most prestigious, powerful empires of Mesoamerica are declared the direct divine ancestors of the Mexica state.
it completely legitimizes their conquests. They're not just upstarts anymore.
They are fulfilling a cosmic duty. They're restoring an ancient imperial tradition.
And the creation myth at the heart of this, the fifth sun itself, it's all about sacrifice.
It is. The myth says that after the last world ended in a great flood, the gods gathered in the darkness at the sacred ancient city of Teotihuacan. Two of them, the humble, sickly god Nanahuatzin and the boastful Tezcatlipoca, had to sacrifice themselves.
They threw themselves into a great bonfire.
They did. Nanahuatzin went first and became the sun, Tonatiuh. Tezcatlipoca hesitated and became the moon. And that ultimate act of divine sacrifice is what created our current era.
So by putting Tenochtitlan at the dead center of their stone, the Mexica are saying that their time, their empire, is the defining moment of history born from the ultimate sacrifice.
It is their divine right to rule. And that conviction meant their goal was never just to survive. Even when they were swimming for their lives in 1299, the ultimate goal was always to establish a Nezahualcoyotl and continue that imperial tradition. The hardship was just a test to prove they were worthy.
It's just breathtaking to connect that deep mythological destiny with the sheer physical reality they had to create. Let's remind everyone of the adversity again. Salt lagoon, no fresh water, no farmable land. They needed some serious engineering just to exist.
The scale of the transformation is what makes it a miracle. They didn't just adapt. They violently transformed the landscape in less than 200 years, from 1325 to 1521. This required civil works projects on a scale that, frankly, eclipsed most of what was happening in Europe at the time.
Okay, let's start with the most basic problem: food. How do you feed a city of hundreds of thousands on a salt marsh with no land?
This is where their single greatest innovation comes in, the Chinampa. This is absolutely central to their economic miracle, and it's often misunderstood. People call them floating gardens, but they weren't floating.
So what were they?
They were artificial islands. They would fence off shallow, rectangular areas of the lake bed with reeds. Then they'd dredge up all that rich, mucky mud from the bottom of the lake and pile it into that rectangle until it was a raised field a few feet above the water level.
And they planted trees to hold it all together.
Exactly. They planted ahuejote trees along the borders, and the roots would grow down and anchor the whole structure permanently to the lake bed. They were literally building new land.
What was the agricultural advantage of this?
Staggering. Because the fields were constantly irrigated from below by the lake water, they were incredibly fertile. They never had to lie fallow. This meant a Mexican farmer could get 3, 4, sometimes up to 7 harvests a year from a single plot.
Which is just unimaginable compared to dry land farming.
Unimaginable. The Chinampas turned the lake from an ecological liability into their greatest economic asset. It gave Tenochtitlan an endless local food supply.
So that's the food problem solved. Now, the water problem. How did they separate the fresh water they needed from the undrinkable salt water all around them?
This was a massive challenge. They had to control this immense volatile body of water. Their answer was the construction of huge albarradones. These were massive dikes or dams.
The most famous one being the Albarradon of Nezahualcoyotl.
Yes, and the scale is just hard to comprehend. It was about 10 miles long, 12 feet wide, and maybe 6 or 8 feet high. Built from stone, compacted earth, and massive wooden pilings driven deep into the lake bed.
And the labor for that must have been immense.
A huge, centralized state effort. It required thousands of conscripted workers from all the cities of their Triple Alliance.
What did the dike actually do?
It cut Lake Texcoco in half. It created this large western zone of the lake that stayed relatively fresh because it was fed by rivers from the mountains. The eastern zone stayed saline. This was fundamental. It protected Tenochtitlan from brackish floods and maintained a freshwater basin right next to the city.
Okay, so Chinampas for food, Albarradones for flood control. But they're still living on an island. They need a constant supply of fresh drinking water from the mainland.
And for that, they built aqueducts. The Aqueducto de Chapultepec was a massive stone and earth structure that spanned the lake.
From Chapultepec, because that's where the best springs were.
Exactly, and the engineering was so clever. They didn't just build one channel, they built it with a system of twin pipes.
Twin pipes, why?
For maintenance and hygiene. It was brilliant. They would use one channel to bring water to the city while the other one was being drained, cleaned, and repaired. This meant the city's water supply was never, ever cut off. A constant flow of clean water to the city center.
So let's tie it all together. The Chinampas, the Albarradones, the aqueducts. What was the result for life in the city?
The result was a city that was a paradigm of organization, especially when you compare it to what was going on elsewhere in the world at the time.
Give us that comparison. It really anchors how incredible this was.
Okay, so think about 16th century London or Paris. They were often smaller, with populations well under 100,000. Their streets were muddy tracks used as open sewers. There was no organized waste management. Disease was everywhere.
And Tenochtitlan.
Tenochtitlan, with a population that might have been over 200,000, had organized garbage collection crews, dedicated public latrines, and street sweepers.
And the canals were their highways.
The whole system was based on water traffic. Maybe 80,000 to 100,000 canoes a day, moving goods and people. It was efficient, it was clean. Sewage and waste were routed away, not left in the streets. It was a healthier, better organized, and more advanced habitat than almost any other large city in the world at that time.
It just completely defies rational expectation. They took the worst possible place to live and turned it into a masterpiece.
It's the ultimate testament to human intelligence and just tremendous, relentless effort. They refused to accept the limitations of their environment. They used organization, political will, and brilliant engineering to turn their greatest liability into their greatest strength.
And that brings us back to Moctezuma II in 1502. He's been chosen. He's standing there looking at that massive Tenochtitlan sculpture made of pink stone hauled all the way from Tenayuca over the causeways they built to crown Nezahualcoyotl's tomb.
And he's not filled with joy. He's consumed by the deep, heavy weight of all this history. He's reflected on the brutality of their survival-eating mud monsters and the cosmic destiny they forged on this lake.
He's asking himself what his own destiny will be.
What will history say about him? When will he, too, reach Nezahualcoyotl in that watery underworld? He's carrying the full, magnificent, terrifying weight of this miraculous, impossible empire, knowing full well that the water that saved them could also be the water that destroys them.
It is truly stunning. The Mexica overcame impossible odds by synthesizing this ancient, powerful imperial destiny with hyper-intense engineering and this deep, resourceful understanding of their local biodiversity.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought for you, the listener, to really think about. We've seen that the strength of this civilization was its audacity, its choice to transform the environment, not just accept its limits.
Consider that, the ambition and the cost of it. They built the heart of a major metropolitan empire on a salt marsh, an environment that was actively hostile to human life.
So what does that say about the strength, the determination, and maybe the necessary ruthlessness of any ambitious project, an ancient empire, a modern company, anything? What does it mean to look at an impossible environment and decide not just to survive there, but to master it completely? To turn a catastrophic liability into your defining strength?
What other supposedly uninhabitable environments did ancient civilizations intentionally seek out and then completely master, demanding perfection from a hostile landscape?
It really forces us to redefine what we even mean by the word impossible.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We hope this knowledge sticks with you.
We'll see you next time.